transition of technology in order for Greece technology industry to necessarily to become independent to overcome its economic policy. And also there's policy with less in export or primary industry of Greece, for example, and less in Germany of export of technological advantage and expensive product, for example, to Greece, for so on and so forth. The kind of destruction of the government policy in order to benefit the economy is necessarily going to negatively affect the kind of economic change as of EU as a whole. I concede that if one country of EU would fail, other countries will also fail. Because this policy I have shown you, this policy would negatively affect the government's strategy to improve the economic situation by taking the proposal with coercion of the policy to be implemented. We think the consequences of the economic downturn is going to be deprived under this policy. Mr. Speaker, this policy is not necessarily all about the economic power balance between Germany and Greece, so on and so forth. We think within more than 50 countries in the European zone, we have to recognize they have their own independent strategy to improve this economic situation. We think this policy is counterproductive to overcome the go in side proposition wants to protect. From these reasons, side opposition is extremely proud to oppose.
I thank the opposition whip for his remarks. I'd like to call on the leader of the opposition, who is the opposition, please elevate the station. The name of our home is here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So today's government side has an extremely simplistic idea that they only think that there's a country, when we talk about Eurozone, there's only a country that is actually failing literally and a country that is extremely strong. We're talking about, my partner already raised an example of Czech, right? These countries are still under the state of being able to keep the sovereignty. They're not receiving bailing out money from ECB, and they're able to manage their fiscal policy. No way. Under that cases, we think that our paradigm can better keep the sovereignty and let more freedom to these kind of countries. Their paradigm is going to deprive even these countries, not only limited to Greece, but also Czech or also Austria, these weaker countries, sovereignty, a right to strategy is also going to be deprived. That was the argument that was brought up since leader opposition, which was neglected by the other side. But how? So let's look at this debate from three issues. Firstly, is the ECB actually a neutral actor who can both reflect the opinion of diverse countries? Secondly, which paradigm can better solve the economic crisis occurring in the status quo? And thirdly, the issue of sovereignty. So on to the first point about the ECB. So they somehow said they have different sorts of representatives. Therefore, we think that it is totally okay. But we have given many reasons why this ECB is likely to lean forward to stronger countries like Germany and France. We've told you how these countries are the most of the investors, and these people have much more trust or much more legitimacy and much more say in these kind of committees, and therefore we think the Germany's opinion, France's opinion are much more likely to be reflected compared to countries like Austria, Czech, and so forth. And we think therefore there wasn't sufficient engagement coming from the other side of health. And this point nicely leads to my second substantive about which paradigm can better solve the economic problem occurring in the Eurozone. So we couldn't see a clear problem coming from the government bench, because the government bench was keep saying it's important for them to have the same fiscal policy, same currency policy, but we couldn't see the clear harm and how this is going to actually solve the economic problem occurring. But under our paradigm, under our model, we clearly told you how strengthening the weaker countries and minimizing the gap between these countries are the best way for the Eurozone to go, right? Because if weaker countries remain weaker, that means that the stronger countries have to bail out these countries again and again and repeatedly, just like what happened in Greece, just happened what with Italy, Portugal, right? We don't want to repeat these kind of procedure. In that kind of cases, we think that having their own strategy is a better method to go, actually, because they can have more opportunity to create long-sustaining industry, for example, establish a new company and stuff, right? We think that under our paradigm, we can prevent the next Greece, we can prevent the next Italy, Portugal, we can prevent the Czech from becoming, or East European countries to become the next Greece, because we think they have more independent policies and prevent, for example, their outflow of cooperation into other sorts of countries, and they can invite more multinational companies. We think their recognition of the Eurozone is totally too simplistic. They only look at the two two extreme ends. So moving on to the third issue about the issue of sovereignty. So we clearly told you how, in order for the tax collection to be legitimate, always tax collection to be successful, people have to always understand that there's legitimacy for the actor to collect that money. We told you how. My leader opposition since the beginning told you how, the ECB is a totally a separate actor, distant actor from citizens on the ground. There's not people who have even chosen by the citizens on the ground. On the other hand, even if the politicians are not as good as maybe in terms of economic policies, they are at least are the ones who are chosen by the citizens, and we think they have much more legitimacy. We think that less tax exemption, less tax avoidance are likely to occur under our paradigm. We think that therefore we can prevent the next Greece, next Italy. We can prevent the weaker but not failing countries in the status quo to become the next Greece. For all these reasons, we're extremely proud of your vote. Thank you.
How long did you spoke for?
4 minutes almost.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when are you going to clap this time? No, nothing. Okay.
Right. Please share the speech being promised to conclude back.
Ladies and gentlemen, the stance of side proposition is clear. We believe and we prove that currency will lead implications towards the economy, which opposition at last conceded as well. And the question is, when fiscal policies are individually decided and the currency is shared and exchange rate is shared as well, what exactly should we do as the Eurozone, right? So what proposition has been saying is this. We concede that these economies are not homogeneous, but precisely because they are not homogeneous, in order to reconciliate these differences, a central planning agency is needed. We see that Euro crisis happened, as my first speaker told you, precisely in the absence of this policy. So it is burden of side opposition to tell us why it will not happen again if we do not implement this policy. What side opposition ignored here is the fact that this is a comparative debate. So it's not enough for them to tell us that our policy is not perfect, because it is not our burden of proof to prove that this is the perfect economic policy because it doesn't exist. But it is their burden of proof to prove to us why status quo is better than our policy. It is extremely weird for me how they actually conceded that there was a problem but refused to solve the problem and claimed that it was simply solved with the absence of this particular policy. And all the harms that have been talked about are actually already happening in the status quo in the absence of our policy, so we do not see how it comes into play. Now, how this debate plays out? It plays out in 3 questions. 1, how do we actually understand currency, exchange rate, fiscal policies, etc.? Second, is control actually possible under both scenarios? But lastly, on whether our trade-offs are justified as proposed by side proposition. So firstly, side opposition was the one which are quite confused here, right? So they try to confuse us by saying that we are wrongly understanding it by government spending, right? So they only want to focus their case on tax rates only. So we said, 1, they didn't negate our cases about government spending, but more importantly, we said that even if we assume that it's also about tax rates, we say it's okay, because it doesn't really affect our case when it comes to central planning system. But more importantly, what we have been telling you all the way through is that these fiscal policies are right now individually decided when the exchange rate is being shared. And when the currency and both the exchange rate is being shared, it affects these fiscal policies and it leads to influences which these economies, 1, cannot expect and 2, cannot deal with on individual basis. But secondly, now understanding what these things actually are, is control actually possible? So side proposition provides you with a few scenarios right now, right? So either in some areas of economics right now within Eurozone, there is no say at all. So each economy works on its own and allows you to lead to consequences which no one can expect. On the second scenario, on other areas of economy, it is being hugely dominated by countries like Germany or France, right? So the only problem is about domination. We told you that the central bank is actually possible in making it better, as they have conceded. There are more than 15 countries in the Eurozone right now, and we told you how they can mediate their influences and how a central authority can actually be at least a bit more neutral right now than Germany simply one-sidedly coercing Greece itself. But we also told you this, that even if that domination does happen, it is still better now that there is a central planning in contrast to before, where some areas are being planned, some areas not being planned, and last exchange rate cannot be expected by anyone else, and it makes it very hard for any kind of country to develop the economy based on the unexpected rate of currency. We told you for all three speeches on how currency is so important. They simply say that no, it's not important and it does not really affect the economy. We said that is not the case. We told you how expectation of currency is important. We told you how it affects export, it affects imports, and how at last it affects all these economies. What they have to prove to us, and that's what they said at the end of the speech, right? These problems will be exacerbated, but they never proved to us how the exacerbation happens. We told you that the worst case scenario is something which is very similar to status quo, but very likely, as we have proved to you in all three speeches, that it's going to be a lot better, and there will be central planning where you can we can prevent further Euro crisis from happening and allow a more sustainable future. We are happy to say that proposition participates.